In this episode of the Smart Community podcast, Zoe brings you an interview she did on location in Silicon Valley as part of her Churchill Fellowship trip investigating smart mobility around the world. By the way, if you want to hear more from Zoe about her trip, you should subscribe to her exclusive podcast about her Churchill Fellowship. It's only for supporters on Pozible, so head to pozible.com today, search for My Smart Community and hit support. That's pozible.com, search My Smart Community and hit support. There's several episodes there already for you to get stuck into and hear Zoe's insights from the various people, places and platforms she's been exploring as part of her Churchill Fellowship. In this episode, Zoe speaks with Vienna Harvey from online learning company Udacity. Vienna is a learning technologist that specialises in the self-driving car nanodegrees at Udacity. She also did a thesis project about the role of ethics in the design of self-driving cars, and she shares some really interesting findings from her research in this area. Zoe and Vienna also discuss the talent gap in the autonomous vehicle industry and how Udacity's nanodegrees are one way to combat this. And they finish their conversation covering the emerging trend of actually seeing self-driving cars on the road in more places around the world. There are a couple of tech glitches in this episode. It's very listenable, however you will notice a few spots where Vienna's words get slightly clipped or the speed changes slightly. As always, we hope you enjoy listening to this episode as much as we enjoyed making it.
Welcome to the smart community, smart regions, smart towns and smart cities. It's where we live, work and play with smart communities. The future starts today. Big data, smart mobility, emerging trends galore. The Smart Community Podcast is what you're looking for.
Hello, Vienna. How are you?
Hi, Zoe. I'm doing well. Thanks for having me.
No, thanks for coming on. Thanks for taking some time out to talk to me today.
Yeah, of course. Pleasure to be here.
Awesome. Let's jump straight in. And can you tell us about your background and what you're passionate about?
So I really got interested in self-driving cars and the whole surrounding space when I was at Stanford, and I was writing my thesis about the role of ethics in the design of self-driving cars and wanting to approach more from that viewpoint than necessarily just the nitty-gritty technical details. And that led me into thinking more about how can we not only create these vehicles to be as technically sound and as good as they can be, but also how can we ensure that the people who will be using and buying them someday are comfortable with this technology and feel good about it, which eventually led me to my current job at Udacity and working on our self-driving car program here.
Excellent. Well, I think you've already answered this, but I was going to ask what sparked your interest specifically in this space?
Yeah, I definitely come down pretty hard on the self-driving car side of things. That is more my area of expertise than kind of the broader smart community space that it seems like your podcast focuses on. So I do have a pretty little niche interest within that. I think they are going to be a really important part of broader smart communities in the future.
Yeah, no, definitely. Well, let's go straight in and let's talk about Udacity. Can you tell us a little bit about the company and what your role is in the space?
Yeah, absolutely. So Udacity is a global online learning platform with the mission to democratize education and really improve access to education across the world. And so we work with industry leaders to create online learning programs that we call nanodegree programs that are very project focused on getting students job ready and helping them make a big change in their career or continue to advance in a career that they already have. And so we have a few different schools across the company. I work in our School of Autonomous Systems as a learning technologist, and the School of Autonomous Systems has 4 nanodegree programs within it. There's Introduction to Self-Driving Cars, Self-Driving Car Engineer, Flying Cars, and Robotics Software Engineer. As I'm sure is obvious, I work mostly with the self-driving cars ones. A big part of my job as a learning technologist is to test code that students have written and submitted as their capstone project for self-driving car engineer. And we actually have a self-driving car at the office, and students taking that nanodegree program are able to write code that then drives an actual self-driving car around the parking lot. And so I'm the person who is the backup driver safety check for when we're doing that. And then I also just manage the car in general. We get a lot of visitors to the office who want to come and see the car. So I'm the car person at Udacity.
Yeah, cool. I just had a go in Carla, the car.
Good. Yeah, we like Carla.
Yeah, no, it was really cool. Okay, I'm really keen to hear what your thoughts are about the future of transport. So we're talking about self-driving cars, we've got flying cars. Obviously, Udacity sees a future in these different types of modes. So how do you see that playing out, and what kind of timeframes are we talking? What do you think?
I think increasing accessibility for more people is going to be a huge part of transportation in the future. And whether that comes from self-driving cars, which would be able to give more people access to that kind of mobility that they might not otherwise have. So, for example, someone who is too young or too old to drive a regular car could maybe get that increased mobility through a self-driving car. I think the rise of ride-sharing services like Lyft and Uber has already played a huge part and will continue to do so. I think it's going to be interesting to see how that shared ride aspect comes to intersect with the self-driving aspect in upcoming years.
Yeah, definitely. I think the shared aspect will really revolutionize the way the transport network operates.
Definitely.
And I guess we have it now in public transport. That's the original shared mobility. But if we can increase that, so then it's people's first or second choice rather than third or fourth or fifth or never choice.
What you do if you have no other option.
Yeah, exactly.
That's going to be absolutely crucial, I think. And especially in the very near future, just figuring out how we can not only work on developing new technologies, but also work with and continue to improve what's available.
Yeah, actually looking at our current assets and how we can utilize those better and use technology to do so. I know it's not your area, but the flying car is on everybody's lips at the moment, or everyone's thoughts at the moment. How does that fit in, do you think?
Yeah, flying car. I would say that one is something that's definitely exciting and cool to talk about, but I think it is pretty far on the horizon, at least as something relatively mainstream. I think it will remain a little more niche for the time being, especially because that's something that people aren't really already seeing. Like with self-driving cars, for example, at least in Silicon Valley where I'm based, people are pretty used to seeing self-driving cars out on the roads. And so there's starting to be that public perception. What is a self-driving car? Oh, that's one right there. And we don't really have that yet with flying cars. So I think those are further down the road, and we'll probably work up to it starting with smaller scale delivery drones, for example. But I do think that is potentially a pretty big area that will come into play further in the future.
Definitely. Okay, well, let's jump into your area of specialty. Let's talk about the ethics of autonomous vehicles.
Yeah, so I think just on a pretty broad scale, that's something that's still very much being figured out. And there's this idea that I was exploring briefly in my thesis about who might be responsible for any ethical challenges surrounding these vehicles. And the bulk of my research for my thesis essentially wanted to evaluate people's moral consistency when reasoning about ethically challenging scenarios. And so if you're familiar with the trolley problem, which is a thought experiment in which there's a runaway trolley and it's either going to hit one person or it's going to hit 5 people, and you have to decide which it's going to be. So when I was writing my thesis, I gave people a variant of that problem, but with a self-driving car. And essentially the choice was always save the people in the car or save the people on the road. And I wanted to see how consistent people were in their reasoning. And that was a very, rudimentary survey. It was pretty simple, but I think those are the kinds of things that are going to need to be talked about and figured out as self-driving cars get closer to market readiness. And that ties back into what I was mentioning earlier about just how do we get consumers comfortable with this technology, and how do we design these cars in a way that people can feel good about using and interacting with them.
What were your findings in that survey?
In general, people were very consistent with a strong leaning towards wanting to prioritize the safety of the person in the car, which I think does make sense from a consumer standpoint, because you're not going to want to buy a car that you worry might sacrifice your life. The one big exception to that I noted was if there became a utilitarian argument at stake. And in that case, people were willing to depart from an otherwise consistent line of reasoning and say, no, the car should save wherever there are the most lives to be saved.
Interesting. What are some of the other things that we need to consider with the ethics of self-driving cars?
I think a lot of it is really going to be very consumer driven, especially as we're trying to get self-driving cars to a place where they could conceivably be out on the market. So I think it's great to try and consider all aspects as thoroughly as possible ahead of time, but a part of it is going to come down to just market research and what will people be willing to tolerate.
With that, I guess the ethics of it, and then once there's an incident, did you look at how the insurance or the responsibility, who that would come down to?
I touched on it briefly in my thesis as a potentially sticky area, but I didn't really go into it in depth at that point.
Yeah, I think it's an area that needs a lot more thought, trials, testing.
Yeah.
Yeah, cool. I'm keen to hear about when I was doing the demo this morning, I was talking to David, and what I like about Udacity is the practical kind of job ready skills that it gives. Was that the real reason for being for Udacity, and what's the vision?
So Udacity, I think I mentioned earlier, our core mission as a company is just democratizing education, and then that has kind of evolved into specifically the education that we want to provide as being this very job-focused, project-based, and helping people take the steps that they might want to take to make a big change in their career. And this idea that you can be a lifelong learner, and that even once you're out of traditional schooling, you have to stop learning, and it's never too late to big change in your life. And then in particular with some of the autonomous systems courses like self-driving car, there's a really big talent gap in the industry right now where people are looking for hiring candidates who can fill that gap and who come in already with those skills and with that more specialized knowledge of the space.
And I know that it's majority online. Was that something that was really important for that democracy of learning?
Yeah, I think the online aspect is what enabled us to reach as many people as we do. So we have some free courses in addition to the paid nanodegree program. And I mean, we have a lot of students from, I think, around 160 countries worldwide who are taking these courses. And that, because it's all online, that's what allows us to have the reach and that access that we do.
Excellent. Okay, well, let's talk about some emerging trends. What do you think people aren't talking about enough in this space?
We are starting to get self-driving cars on the roads. I think the next thing is going to be expanding where they are, because right now the majority of them are still fairly localized in Silicon Valley and a few other places that are known for working with these. So I think it'll be interesting to see the continued expansion there. I think as there become a greater number of companies working on this technology, a lot of companies are going to try and specialize into a specific segment of that market so that everyone can kind of have their space, have their specialty, and not necessarily all be competing for the exact same thing.
Yeah, totally. So having not just autonomous vehicle market, but the particular niche that will come out, and people will start to look at those and focus their skills on a certain area.
Exactly.
Cool. Is there anything else you would like to add on the ethics or Udacity at all?
I think I'm just really excited to see where this industry continues to evolve and see what continues to come next.
Yeah, no, me too. And I think fitting into that smart mobility space, and like you said, bringing, not just, okay, now we have new technology, but how do we use the existing assets in a more effective and efficient way?
Yeah, so I think that'll be good. I think it's really exciting to see the smart community space take off. And as that continues to become more prominent, we're going to need more jobs in those industries. We're going to have more faces within the industry that will need jobs to fill. And so I'm excited to see how Udacity can continue to help with that.
Yeah. And I think I was having a conversation this morning with someone about, how mobility and access and transport is kind of directly related, particularly in Silicon Valley, to that, the workforce and how people get around and what that looks like. And it's so interesting, and it'll be interesting to see how it all kind of plays out, particularly in, Silicon Valley. Some of the, the things that are being developed here aren't necessarily for right here. They're for places that have a lot at stake and, like you said, increase access to people that don't have mobility choices now. So I think that will be a really exciting part. It won't just be like, oh, okay, now instead of an Audi, I have an autonomous Audi. It's like, oh, I didn't have a choice before and now I do, and now I can get to work and now I can have a career or a job or whatever. So that's really exciting.
Yeah, and being able to bring that level of mobility and that access to people who don't have it.
Yeah, and the education piece as well, because I think mobility is both physical and digital. So yeah, what you guys are doing is really exciting.
Absolutely.
Cool. Oh, well, it's been so great to speak with you.
Yeah, thank you. This was a pleasure.
I was just talking to David. I think I'll have to sign up for a course.
Oh, you should. They're good.
Awesome. Well, thanks again for coming onto the podcast and talking to me. And I look forward to meeting you in person.
Yeah, thanks so much, Zoe. This was great.
Excellent. We'll talk soon.
Yeah, look forward to seeing you in our classroom, maybe.
Yeah, excellent. Awesome. Thanks, Vienna. Talk soon.
Thanks, Zoe.
Thanks so much for listening to the Smart Community Podcast. Show notes for this episode and all other episodes are available on our website, mysmart.community. If you have any questions for us or any of our guests, you can email hello@mysmart.community or find us on the socials. We are on LinkedIn, Facebook, and Twitter @Comm PodE. That's comm with 2 M's. If you are enjoying the podcast, please leave us a rating and review at wherever you listen. This really helps us reach more ears, so thank you in advance. As always, I hope you enjoyed listening to this episode as much as I enjoyed making it.
The Smart Community Podcast is what you're looking for.